Good evening, everybody, and welcome to what will be a very important and informative presentation. I'm delighted that you're here, and it's a privilege to introduce, where did he go? Oh, there he is. Professor Michael B. Stoff. Professor Stoff holds a doctorate from Yale University and has taught history at Yale, Vassar, and Bard College. And for more than 40 years, where?
I'm going to say, hook 'em.
Yes, for those of you who don't know, the Hyman boys both graduated UT Austin, and one went to UT Medical School, the other went to UT Law School. That's okay, I'm not going to go any farther than that. During that time, Professor Stoff served as Director of Graduate Studies and the Honors Program in the History Department and headed UT's nationally acclaimed program, Plan 2 Honors Program, for over a decade. He is the author of Oil, War, and American Security, co-author of The Manhattan Project, a documentary introduction to the atomic age, a series co-edited of the Oxford New Narratives in American History, and co-author of 5 American history textbooks. He has lectured widely about American politics, culture, and U.S. foreign policy, the American presidency, the Second World War, and the atomic bomb. Honored many times for his teaching, he is a recipient of the prestigious Friars Teaching Excellence Prize and the UT System-Wide Regents Outstanding Teaching Award, as well as being launch president of the Academy of Distinguished Teachers at UT. In 2008, he was named an organization of American Historians Distinguished Lecturer, and in 2015, he was recognized for his contributions to Texas life and culture with Introduction into the Philosophical Society of Texas. He is currently at work on a book about the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. We are delighted and fortunate to have him as our presenter tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi. It's a pleasure to be back. I was here 2 years ago talking about Jews and the Second World War. This time, I'm back again to talk about Jews again, this time about anti-Zionism. I want to thank particularly Cheryl Kramer, who put together this panel and me and the rabbi as well. So thank you, Cheryl, for all of your hard work. You are the best organizer I've ever worked with. We'll be joined, as you know, by Rabbi Peter Hyman, the soon-to-be emeritus rabbi of this congregation, and a panel of 2 students and 2 faculty members from Washington College in Chestertown. They'll introduce themselves later in the program. Before we begin, I'd like to outline what we're going to do so you have a sense of where we're going. First, Rabbi Hyman is going to talk briefly about the origins of Zionism. That'll be followed by me. I'll be both presenter and moderator. And I'll talk about the origins of anti-Zionism, some thoughts about why it's happening now, some thoughts about the recent flare-ups on college campuses, and why anti-Zionism might appeal to young Jewish progressive college students. One caveat. My thoughts are speculative and tentative. We have very little hard data on these campus protests, on who is participating, where they're from, why they're participating. And it's important to remember that these protests are ongoing. So with that as a caveat, buyer beware. Next will come some introductions and brief comments by the panelists, followed by some questions from me, and then questions from you. We want to open this up to the audience at large, but I have to ask you 2 favors. The first is, if you get the mic in your hand, please ask a question, don't make a speech, because we have limited time. The second is keep your questions relatively short. That way we'll be able to answer more of them, address them and answer more of them. So, that being said, I'll step back and let the rabbi have the podium, and he'll talk a little bit about Zionism and its origins. Rabbi?
Thank you. So, and not to be long, but Zionism started as a national movement with the goal of creation and support of the Jewish national state in Palestine, in the ancient homeland of Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. Though Zionism originated in Eastern and Central Europe in the latter part of the 19th century, it is in many ways a continuation of the ancient attachment of the Jewish religion to the historical region of what we call Palestine, Israel. According to Judaism, Zion is one of the hills of ancient Jerusalem, and it's the place where God dwells. Now, how many of you know the liturgy for the Torah service? The liturgy for the Torah service. What do we say at the beginning? We take out the Torah, and what do we always sing? That, yes. Ki mitzion. What's mitzion? From Zion. From Zion came forth, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, comes forth the Torah, u'davar Adonai miYerushalayim. So there's this parallel. The Jewish Enlightenment movement, known as the Haskalah, of the late 18th century, urged Jews to assimilate into Western secular culture. In the early 19th century, interest in a return to Palestine was kept alive mostly by Christian folk. And it's interesting, it's not just because they wanted to get rid of the Jews, they also thought that was a good thing. And despite the Haskalah, Eastern European Jews did not assimilate, and in reaction to Tsarist pogroms, formed what's called Chovei Tzion, lovers of Zion, to promote the settlement of Jewish farmers and artisans in Palestine. Right? And the father of modern Zionism, anybody know who that was? Thank you. Theodor Herzl believed that European society would never allow Jews to assimilate, and that just spurred the organization of the Zionist movement. And a political turn was given by Zionism through Herzl, who regarded assimilation as most desirable, but in the view of anti-Semitism, impossible to realize. Thus, he argued if Jews were forced to external pressure to form a nation, they could lead a normal existence only through concentration in one territory. So in 1897, Herzl convened the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland, which drew up the Basel Program and started the Zionist drive to create the Jewish homeland in Palestine, supported by the Jewish population. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot much more. Theodor Herzl was primarily responsible for this, and we know ultimately that because of his work and through his passion and through what he did, we now have not only the state of Israel, but we have Zionism as a reality. And I will turn it back over to those who know better than I do, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. I want to take you back to the Borscht Belt of my youth. My parents took me to the Borscht Belt every summer. The Nevele, in case any of you may know. benevolently.
It's 11 spelled backwards.
Yeah, exactly, 11 spelled backwards. We would go and we'd eat. Food was a lot of it, and it wasn't very good, but the portions were large. And we'd listen to the comedians. And a joke that I heard over and over and over again, I'll tell to you tonight. Jewish guy gets marooned on a desert island. He's there for 25 years. He writes in the sand, help, you know, the big letters, help. And finally, he's found. He's found. The captain of the ship that finds him comes ashore, and right there on the beach is a huge and beautiful synagogue. This guy's marooned on an island. He's the only person on the island. And there is a gigantic synagogue. The captain looks down the beach, and there's another synagogue, just as big, just as magnificent. He looks at the guy, and he says, I'm here to save you, but I have a question for you. You're one guy, there are two synagogues. Why? Why did you build two synagogues? Jewish guy looks back at him and he says, well, this is the synagogue I go to, and that's the synagogue I don't go to. Now, you hear this joke, and it has an initial meaning for most of us, which is that it plays off of age-old Jewish stereotypes. The overzealous, contentious Jew, superior to and intolerant of others, continually complaining. We even have a word for it, kvetching. But I've always seen something different in that joke, something more penetrating, something wiser, an essential truth about Jews. To me, that joke says ideas matter. Ideas matter. It's been said we are the people of the book, and we argue endlessly about it, don't we? And we argue endlessly about it because ideas matter. They matter because they lie at the very core of our faith, as they do for most faiths. And they matter to us especially because we can carry them with us wherever in the diaspora we may land. Now, if you're interested in anti-Zionism, and I assume you are, and you're interested in Zionism as well, these are two big ideas, very big ideas, and we have argued over them for a very, very long time. They're big ideas in part because they're definitional ideas. They're ideas about who we are and where we're going. So I'm going to take a look at anti-Zionism. And if you look up anti-Zionism in the dictionary, there's a rather simple definition. It's defined as, quote, being against Zionism. Now, it means, in the most literal sense, being against the formal Zionist movement of the late 19th century, with its goal of creating a Jewish state in the ancestral homeland of Jews in the Middle East, where Jews have had a continuous presence for more than 3,000 years. But Zionism, if we unpack it, means a lot more than that. It means that we Jews are not simply members of a religion. Zionism claims, first and foremost, that we are a people, culturally, historically, anthropologically. Second, it claims that as a people, Jews have the right of all people to national self-determination, to determine their own national futures, like the Germans, like the Brits, like the Arabs, like every other ethno-national group. The third thing that Zionism means is that the nation to be created by the Jews should be created in their ancient homeland, in what is today Israel. Now, given that broader definition of anti-Zionism, than Zionism, than anti-Zionism as a stand against those claims stretches back millennia, stretches back to the Philistines, stretches back to the Babylonians, stretches in more modern times back to the Turks and the Ottoman Empire, all of which denied the right of Jews to live independent and sovereign in their ancestral homeland. Anti-Zionism, in its more modern manifestations, remains faithful to that tradition of denial, of denying Jews the right to live in their own land, as I say, sovereign and independent. And it's often, though I want to stress really clearly here, not always, it's often not always rooted in anti-Semitism, that shape-shifting slander of the Jewish people, which reinvents itself depending on its historical context. Sometimes it attacks Jews for their monotheism or their failure to embrace the Christian God. Other times it attacks Jews for their statelessness, for their poverty, for their wealth, for their success, for their failure, and even as a racially distinct group, both at once superior and inferior. One of the few racial groups, if we categorize Jews as a race. I don't, some do. One of the very few that are both inferior and superior at the same time. Anti-Zionism, as I said, isn't always rooted in anti-Semitism, especially when we consider today's topic, which is Jewish anti-Semitism. If we look at the Jewish strain of anti-Semitism, we see a very complicated picture. That should come as no surprise to you. There have always been Jewish anti-Zionists, both in Europe and in the United States. And like anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is a shapeshifter too, dependent very often on its historical context. Anti-Zionists have come in a variety of forms. The ultra-Orthodox, religious anti-Zionists, example here, the Satmars, see the creation of the land of Israel, the nation of Israel, the state of Israel, as a false messianism, promoted by secularists unwilling to wait for the promised land, for the ingathering of Jews at the return of the Messiah. At the turn of the 20th century, there were reform and secular immigrant Jews in the United States, like the very first Secretary of Commerce, Jacob Schiff, who saw a Jewish state as a danger to assimilation, as a danger to acceptance that diasporic Jews seem to seek out almost everywhere. How is it such a danger? Because it revived the age-old appearance of dual loyalty, of Jews being loyal not just to the nation in which they find themselves, but being loyal to something else, in this instance, Israel. In the aftermath, they fear that this age-old appearance of dual loyalty would lead to an endless stream of Dreyfus-like affairs that would punish Jews deemed untrustworthy. There are also hardcore Jewish advocates of diaspora among anti-Zionists. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, they see the future of Judaism in the diaspora, both as a means of multinational safe haven for Jewish survival, with Jewish communities all over the world being harder to stamp out than one country that contains all Jews. They also see the diaspora as a source of cultural potency, the interaction of Jewish tradition with whatever nation and culture Jews find themselves in. They cannot accept Israel as the center of Jewish life and culture. But already they see an Israel that has overtaken the United States as the single largest locus of Jewish life in the world. By 2050, demographers tell us a majority of the world's Jews will live in Israel rather than outside of it. Which means that for the first time in 2 millennia, diaspora will no longer define Jewish existence. And too often today, there are Jews and others who depict their anti-Zionism using current models of racism, apartheid, post-imperial settler colonialism. These are currently popular models in the West for understanding the world the West made and how the West expanded that world. Those who use these frameworks, well, they find an easy binary to understand complex problems, an easy binary of oppressor and oppressed. And they make easy analogies between the struggles of Palestinians and the struggles of African Americans and Native Americans under the broad banner of what they call the intersectionality of the oppressed. The idea that oppressed peoples everywhere have common experiences and that they intersect. And therefore, if you are serious about tolerance, if you are serious about inclusiveness, well, then you must understand Israel in terms of its exclusiveness. See Israel as something not good, something that oppresses others. On closer inspection, in my view, however, these models, useful as they are in understanding the West and its colonial possessions, seem hopelessly out of touch with the realities on the ground in the Middle East, where 2 indigenous peoples with deep historical roots are vying for the same plot of land. But how are we to understand the appeal of any of these strains of anti-Zionism to this generation of young Jewish progressive students? Let's begin with context. In my view, as in the view of many of my historian colleagues, context is king. Context is extremely important. So let's begin with the current context. Here's the big picture. Realignment. A massive realignment occurring simultaneously in the world at large and in the United States. We are now experiencing a realignment of our political coalitions. I'll give you a small example. Labor. There are now unions no longer endorsing Democrats. The old New Deal coalition, which was founded in part on labor, organized and unorganized, is now shattered. And increasingly, working men and women are turning toward the Republican Party. This is a major realignment. It's one of the reasons why our politics is so chaotic today, because of that realignment. And it is occurring simultaneously with a global realignment. The old post-World War II international system is breaking apart. And so far, nothing has replaced it. The Cold War, whatever else it was a system for ordering international relations. That system is gone. And we have nothing yet in its place, which makes the international world as uncertain as the domestic world. So here we have an age of uncertainty. On top of that, here's what young Americans, Jews included, have faced in the first 25 years of their lives. One of the most disputed elections in US history, and I'm not talking Trump versus Biden, I'm talking about Bush versus Gore. Had to go to the Supreme Court to be decided. Next, terrorist attack, the worst in American history. Changed the world, certainly changed our world. Next, an economic collapse that undermined faith in the American dream. Add to that, the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement. Add to that, a pandemic that isolated these young kids from the support of their families, their friends, their neighbors. At the same time, we see in our own country, but across the globe, an effort to undermine prevailing institutions, whether of government, or of the media, or of science, or of education, or of democracy itself. And something else, something none of us has ever encountered before. As many as 4 existential threats, not just to Jews, but to the human race. The environmental threat, the nuclear threat, the biological threat of pandemics, and, at least according to some experts, artificial intelligence. No other generation has faced this number of threats to their existence, and no other generation has faced them simultaneously. To all of this, add the particular threat of anti-Semitism for Jews generally, and for Jewish students in college in particular. After all, colleges are among the most vulnerable institutions in American life. That's why they always end up being so chaotic and filled with protest. Colleges are places that, at least theoretically, and often actually, are open to ideas, are committed to free speech, and have an open door policy to the outside world. You can walk onto virtually any campus in the United States, and this makes universities and colleges vulnerable to any activist who wants to wander onto campus with a bullhorn and a case to make. These are also universities and colleges where the BDS movement, boycott, divest, sanction, aimed at Israel, have been percolating for decades, at least 2 decades, with the express aim of crippling, if not destroying, Israel, and with the consequences, intended or not, of demonizing all Jews, not just Israelis. It's no wonder, then, that this generation of college students suffers from high rates of depression, of anxiety, and sadly, of suicide. It's no wonder that this generation seeks easy solutions to complex and unnerving problems. They're in vogue now, these easy solutions. It's an age of uncertainty. We seek certainty, and simplicity gives us a certain kind of simplicity and a simple explanation. That's certainly one key to understanding what's happening on college campuses. We have a volatile mix, a young generation that, like all young people in all ages, have an underdeveloped sense of complexity. And as important, a difficult time, and this is something in 40 years of teaching, more, 50 I guess, that I found very difficult, and that is teaching my students the meaning of the word nuance. Nuance, not either or, but to what degree? To what degree is something true? To what degree is something false? This is a very difficult concept to grasp at any age, but particularly for the young who have little experience with the complexities of the world. Many prefer, particularly activists, a simpler and easy route, a kind of binary framework for understanding the world. An either-or construction, the very construction that nuance is designed to undercut. An either-or construction. The world is good or evil. People in it are good or evil. Things are true or false. No gray zones. And too often, in the case of Israel, oppressed or oppressor. This makes all of us, and particularly the young, susceptible to demagoguery, that by definition speaks to emotion rather than rationality, that trades in fear and hate, that sees opposition not as honest disagreement, but as an existential threat. And that is part of the problem with today's politics. Each side sees the other as an existential threat. For that, there can be no compromise. Add to this social media that spreads innuendo, falsehood, praise, condemnation, invitations to protest by pushing a button. It can exert pressure, peer pressure, like a Hulk Hogan headlock. And in the case of some Jewish students who come from a tradition of welcoming strangers and repairing the world, social media can depict the suffering of Palestinians as a colossal injustice, an injustice that has no reason, that has no rhyme, an injustice that could only come from an unjust and, in the minds of some, illegitimate state. Maybe you can see how this generation of young progressive Jews could find such a narrative compelling. They are, after all, very much a part of their generation. And some of these young progressive Jews, like many young American Jews, have a less unquestioning devotion to the state of Israel than past generations. For them, it's no longer Israel right or wrong. They're engaged with Israel. They care about Israel, perhaps as much as their parents and grandparents, perhaps more. Unlike some of those parents and grandparents, they've actually been to Israel and know it from firsthand experience. But they're also more critical of Israel than their parents and grandparents, and they're more sympathetic to Palestinians. They feel less endangered on top of all of this. They feel less endangered as living memories of the Holocaust melt into a distant past, now part of that history, like the Spanish Inquisition and the dinosaurs and the Middle Ages and the Civil War, all in a distant past. Most important of all, Israel is now a place much less definitional for who these college students are than they were for previous generations, than they were for my generation, of which I think a few of you are a part. My generational journey began in 1947, wedged between the end of the Second World War and the creation of the State of Israel. The Second World War, with its living reminders of the Holocaust and a sense that Jews were victims yet again. And on the other side of my birth, the creation of the State of Israel, transforming Jews from victims into victors. A new Jew emerges, no longer the frail nerd, the yeshiva bucher, but the heroic freedom fighter. My youth was bound up with the aftermath of those two signal events in Jewish history. There followed a slow, sometimes halting, but nonetheless steady rise in tolerance for Jews in America and across the world. Barriers to education, to the professions, to finance, and yes, even to country clubs fell. Never once did I encounter an obstacle to advancing my career because of being Jewish. And only rarely did anti-Semitism intrude on my personal life. I grew up and for the most part have lived until the last few decades in a golden age of tolerance for Jews in America and around the world. In an age of, until recent decades, global sympathy for the new state of Israel as a symbol of Jewish strength, as a reality of Jewish resilience, and as a democratic refuge, a haven if the unthinkable happened again. In the 1960s and 70s, in my middle-class suburban Jewish household, Israel became a stand-in for the powerful new Jew. And a kind of muscular Zionism became a stand-in for ritualized Judaism. For us, Zionism was Judaism, and supporting Israel was a way of practicing that faith. Fealty to the State of Israel became an easy substitute for going to synagogue and observing mitzvot. Except, of course, for the high holy days and the endless Passover seders and the endless train of friends' bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. Israel and Judaism became one, even in synagogues, where the Israeli flag now proudly flies. That wasn't always the case. Our family could support Israel with money and voluntarism, and of course, donations to Brandeis University. For us, Brandeis was the secular manifestation of Israel in America. While Israel was a country for Jews, Brandeis was a school for Jews, a university no less. All of this affirmed our identity as Jews, if not our strict observance of Judaism. And it allowed me to go to basketball practice instead of shul on Saturday morning, feeling both Jewish and American in the same moment. But what way will young progressive Jews turn today? Some feel the pull of an embattled Israel and the push of anti-Zionism even more strongly than my generation. The current turmoil in the Middle East has hardened their commitment to a Jewish state, and in some instances, hardened their commitment to Judaism itself, whatever its brand. All over the country, we are seeing increasing rates of participations in synagogues. We just joined this one. Thank you, Barbara. We see an increase in Jewish organizations, even Jewish day schools and day camps. For other young progressive Jews, a relatively small minority, I believe, they're pulled in the opposite direction, away from Israel, by their commitment to what they see as human rights, equal opportunity, and the necessary deed of returning dignity and land to indigenous peoples. They're pulled toward a free Palestine, from the river to the sea, without regard for the millions of Jewish Israelis who already live there and have a historical root in that region, and who have, as I say, their own indigenous claims. Some progressives, Jews and non-Jews alike, see that noxious chant as simply meaning freedom for the Palestinians, unaware or unconcerned that when Israelis and many Jews hear those words, they hear something different, a double vision. They hear death to Jews. I find this cultural blindness, this double vision, frustrating. Many of these same young progressives, Jews and non-Jews, have taught us through the Me Too movement that where sexual civility is concerned, reception, what people hear, is as important, perhaps more important, than what is intended. So now, today, if I hug a female colleague with the intent of supporting her, she might take it as an unwarranted sexual advance, understandably. But how Jews might receive from the river to the sea matters nothing to those who chant it. Reception doesn't matter to the very group of people who told us that it always matters. Amid a rising tide of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, I don't want to leave you with a sense of hopelessness. I'm not hopeless. I'm not hopeless. I believe that these seemingly dire circumstances will have a happy result. I believe that this crisis will lead us to a new age of Jewish consciousness and culture, what cultural anthropologists call a revitalization movement. This they define as a deliberate, organized effort to create a more satisfying culture in the face of denial and discrimination. The creation of a more satisfying culture, a new golden age of Judaism and Jewish culture, but from within. And as evidence, I point to the fact that even progressive young Jewish anti-Zionists ground their arguments against Israel in what they call Jewish values. Pursuing justice, repairing the world, doing what they believe is right, treating others with dignity and respect. And I take their siding with pro-Palestinian protesters not as a sign of betrayal, but as a sign of hope, as a sign that these young fellow Jews are practicing their brand of Judaism, but at a shul I don't go to, yet with values to which I often adhere. And with that, I'll turn to our panel. And let you introduce yourselves, and if you'd like to make a comment, are you going to introduce?
No, I'm going to.
You're going to, okay. Yeah, we have some time. So why don't you folks introduce yourselves and maybe say a little about what you're experiencing on your campus or what you see in other campuses.
Sure. My name is Gabe Feinberg. I'm a math professor at Washington College, and I co-advise Hillel with Dr. Krochmal. We've been doing this for 2.5 years, and as I think you'll hear, for the most part, our campus has been spared, that we haven't seen these anti-Zionist protests or marches. There are whispers here and there, but our events have been safe and well attended.
So yes, my name is Aaron Krochmal, 17-year veteran of Washington College in their biology department. As a warning that my students and colleagues already know, but before turning to biology, I studied homiletics at Jewish Theological Seminary, so I may go on. Give me the hook, Gabe, you know the routine. So Gabe is accurate. We are, I would dare say, fortunate that our campus is calm and for the most part welcoming, nothing global. But I will defy my scientist roots and argue by example, in part to highlight some points we just heard. So I had this exchange with a student middle of last October. I will give a little bit of background about the student, but I don't want you to know who this person is, although you can tell. This student is, I would say, Jewish, as we like to say. Mother is Jewish, does not hold Judaism as part of her identity. And I'm walking across campus as a Jewish professor. People know we're affiliated with Hillel, and she comes running to me with some tension in the eyes and gets in the face like this and says, I think you know what she says, "Free Palestine." That's an interesting way to open a conversation. So my response was, if you're saying that we should address the death of innocents, we can have a conversation. Is this what you mean? Having been well-trained in de-escalation for some years, I have taught in the New York City school districts. I know how to de-escalate. And she says, anyone guess her response? "Free Palestine." So I say, from whom? Palestinians have held free elections since 2005. I'm not sure to whom you're referring. Can you help? And her response was, "Free Palestine." So I say, and what makes you feel that I have any control as a U.S. citizen, Jewish U.S. citizen, over the actions of a foreign government? And her response, "Free Palestine." So is she one to give us hope? I would actually argue yes. I would argue yes, because we have someone who is concerned for the well-being of others. Is this misplaced? That's my opinion. I would call it misplaced. Would I call it misinformed? I would personally call it misinformed, although I gather that others may differ in that opinion. But here is someone who comes from a generation, not like the Gen Xers or the baby boomers. What generation are you? Should I insult you? You millennial?
In between.
Kids today. Who comes from a generation, unlike mine and unlike many of yours, where the value was grit, perseverance, resilience. We have shifted to a point of view where feelings matter. Your well-being is most important. Caring above truth. I didn't say fact. No, I didn't say fact. Caring above truth. So this student who came to me, overwhelmed by what she was feeding herself through the telephone, through her social media, overwhelmed with the nature of war, but only from one side, of course, did not know how to act, because feelings matter. Truth, less so. Perseverance, less so. Tempering action with wisdom, less so. So I would say we are blessed on campus for a variety of reasons that I think we'll all talk about. But that said, kids today are rightfully attuned to the well-being of others. In fact, that's one of the central cores in the Washington College Honor Code. They don't pay me to say that. They don't pay me for anything, really, but you know, I don't know where your tuition money goes, but it doesn't go to us. We want to have students who are socially aware citizens, who are responsible for their neighbor. We want this. Is this student doing that? Yes, but. Yes, but. As we noted a few moments ago, it is the instant fix. It is the I can send support with a click and without a thought that has helped align progressive students, and Jews in particular, to say, I'm doing the right thing because people matter, because caring matters, because we were once and always victims, we're not going to be part and parcel to this. And on top of that, I think our students nationwide, kids today, are very focused on identity, and I think rightfully so. But when we ask about identity, we could have the second and third pages passed along before someone would write Jewish on there. They would write about mental illness, or racial or cultural identity, or talents and skills. And then way down the line, here's 5,000 years of cultural heritage, or 3,000 years of religious heritage. So it's easy to say, oh, this is not part of me, but doing the right thing for the right reasons is part of me. Free Palestine, as I got. So, Emmy, please. I love to put a student on the spot. They pay me to do that, actually.
How do you follow that? Okay. Hi, I'm Emmy. I'm a senior. I'm studying English and history.
And writing your thesis about Mouse.
Oh, yes. I'm writing my English thesis on Art Spiegelman's Mouse as a critical piece of youth Holocaust literature in response to recent book bans. And I'm writing my history thesis on Jewish resistance efforts in Nazi-occupied Europe. I think that I have been more affected than other Jewish students, specifically at Washington College, because I'm much more vocal about it. I like to talk about it more with people who agree with me, with people who don't agree with me. I like to talk about it more. I think about it more. I have family and friends and an entire community in Israel who's been directly affected, unlike a lot of other Jewish people on campus. So directly because of that, I have experienced much more tension around it. But when I'm not a Zionist, when that's not printed on my forehead, when it's not in the conversation, I describe it as a very much don't ask, don't tell kind of tension on campus. You don't bring it up. If something is related to it, you just go, shh, don't talk about that. Because it's very much, we don't want to upset anyone. We don't want to get into that. There are more important things to talk about, and keeping the peace is more important. And in some ways, we have been very, very lucky that that is the environment, because we don't look like Columbia, thank God. But in other ways, it's very much hushed. You cannot talk about that because it's like a taboo topic. And that's what's made it the worst for me, is I feel like whenever I need to talk about it or want to talk about it, I'm just told, no, don't do that. We're just going to pretend it's not happening.
I'm Zoe. I'm also a senior. I'm majoring in environmental science and minoring in chemistry and political science. So you're probably not interested in what my thesis topic is.
This is very interesting.
Yeah,
Was there some
if you are curious, yeah, how medical waste incinerators impact air quality. Yeah. So I would say, like, I feel like our campus has been, like, somewhat, like, pretty much safe. But there's definitely, like, small things that happen, like, here and there. And also I'm the president of Hillel, so
That's kind of relevant.
Yeah, that's kind of relevant.
That's what you lead with next.
Yeah, sorry. I will say, since our campus is so small, I've noticed that a lot of Jewish students who I don't even know will come up to me in like a very casual setting and be like, "Oh my gosh, you're Jewish," and I'm like, how did you know that? But I feel like because I've had like a lot of people like come up to me like in that sense, I just haven't like personally, I guess I haven't experienced any like negative things. Because it's more of like a, oh my gosh, you're Jewish, hello, like kind of vibe on the campus, other than like the small things here and there, but that's typically, I feel like, not brought up around me because a lot of people know that I'm Jewish. So, yeah.
Okay, so now you've met everybody, and I thought I'd start off, we have some time, so I thought I'd start off with a couple of questions, and the first question is, do you think anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism? Let me start small.
Anyone want to?
I'm not directing this toward anybody, just chime in. And
I'll
I'm
answer.
curious, but I'm particularly interested in what the students have to say.
I assume that's because of typical like generational lean towards one. I think most people in our generation would say that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism because they more define anti-Zionism as being against the actions of the secular state of Israel, and that it has nothing to do with their feelings towards Jews. However, I personally don't think that's a correct definition because if you're an anti-Zionist, it means, in principle, you are against Zionism. And what is Zionism? It is the belief that the Jewish people have the right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland, Judea, which is Israel. So if, by definition, if you are anti-Zionist, you are against the idea of Jews. Good. Sorry.
Do you want to use this?
Sure.
This will be easier. Can you read? Does it reach?
Oh, we'll make it happen. How could this possibly go poorly?
Do it.
Testing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
It's working.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay.
Testing. Okay. So I think by definition, if you are anti-Zionist, you are against Zionism, and by definition that means you are against the Jewish people having a right to self-determination. And because, what's the big word in that sentence? Jewish, capital J, that's the subject matter. So I think you can't, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are different concepts, but they are interconnected and they cannot be fully separated.
Anybody else want to
You're interested.
add to that?
I think Emmy said it well.
I will never turn down an opportunity to have a live microphone, as they all know very well. So I actually don't think it matters. I think we're back in the nuance zone. Because when a student can run up to me and say, "Free Palestine," to a random Jewish professor, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Because there is an amalgam in the eye of the, quote, enforcer. And I think that's why many of us are here tonight to try to get some ideas out. I think even some who manifest these feelings now, Jewish or otherwise, who are concerned with the actions of, as Emmy put it, a secular Israeli government, may not be aware of the fact of the full intention, or pardon me, the full meaning of their actions. Namely, you don't get to say if you can determine your own nature, but we can take care of this for you. I think it comes down to a timely question. So right now, until say tomorrow evening, we're trying to sweeten the new year. We eat lots of honey. Stop me if you've heard this one, which I know you have. And the reason we do this, again, we try to, in a sort of real way, will a sweet year for us. But there's another lesson here that is appropriate to our chat this evening, namely, bees, kosher or not? Sorry, Rabbi, I'm stealing your thunder. Bees, kosher or not? No, insects are taboo. But honey, the honey is perfectly kosher. The only food that is kosher that comes from a non-kosher animal. So the question we're asking ourselves at this time of year is, Can the evil tree bear good fruit? Can the deaths of civilian children be justified for saying, well, this is awful, but this is the nature of war, and we have the right to self-determine? That's what we're asking ourselves. And some people will say, no, this is not worth it. Not knowing that they throw the baby away with the bathwater, making an anti-Zionist comment that at the core is fundamentally anti-Semitic, at least in my not so subtle view.
Anybody else would like to add?
Sorry.
Zoe?
So I'm currently taking, this is gonna run, but I'm currently taking a political science class on identity politics. And I think this topic has a little bit to do with generational cohorts and how like a generation, when they're becoming like politically aware, experience like a major shock event. And I think that, I think that peers are kind of like adapting the ideas of others through like social media and like through their phones. And whether or not they like are actually educated on the issue or like have done research into it, they just kind of adopt the same ideas. And so I think it has a lot to do with just, I guess, the socialization part and not actually like sitting down to like do the research or really understand what you're saying. And I think that has a big part in it.
Okay, I have another question for you. How do you explain the absence of protest on your campus? How is your campus different from, well, you mentioned Columbia, or Harvard, or a host of other, my former employer, retired, the University of Texas, where our governor called out the mounted police to control student protesters, arrested them on the spot, and then discovered that their cases were dismissed by a local judge.
So one huge difference is that we are in Chestertown, which if you've been, is a delightful